So I'm going to go ahead and begin. Welcome to our first virtual meeting of the Insight Meditation Community of Charlotte Sangha. I'm showing that it is 7:30. I don't know that everyone can see this, but it looks 32 of us present. So that's a pretty good representation of the folks who would normally join us on a Wednesday night. We will follow our normal format, which will be silent meditation with a little guiding in the beginning, about a 20-minute dharma talk, a 10-minute question period, some brief announcements, and then metta or loving kindness practice. The question and answer period will be an experiment. And so we'll see how it goes. I think it's going to work just fine, but we're learning as we go. So why don't we begin by taking a comfortable posture and preparing for our meditation period. So beginning by bringing the attention to the body. Relaxing. Letting go of any busyness from the day. Letting go of any uncertainty about this new way of us being together. And just grounding ourselves in the body. Feeling the weight of the body, resting on the buttocks, feet on the floor, if where your feet are. Hands wherever they're resting, maybe aware of warmth, pressure, tingling. If you can identify any tension in the body, just allowing it to drain out with the out breath. What we want to cultivate is relaxed attention. And then from the entire body, just to the experience of the breath. Knowing whether we're on an in breath or an out breath. Knowing when that turns from one to the other. And what we're looking for is not the idea of a breath, not the concept of a breath, but the felt experience, the tactile sensation of air moving across skin. And when you notice that the mind has wandered, no need to tell a story, no need to judge your abilities as a meditator. Simply drop the mental activity, return to the breath. So, welcome again to the Insight Meditation Community of Charlotte, our regular Wednesday night Sangha meeting, the first time we've done it electronically. I want to, so my name is Ward Simmons. I'm one of 5 Dharma leaders that rotate responsibility for leading on Wednesday nights. I want to point out that there is a chat function available, and how that can be used is if you want to submit a question for the question and answer period, you can chat it in. You won't get a response on the chat function, but depending on how many questions there are, I'll try to address them. To use the chat function, you have to have a Google account and you have to be logged in to that Google account. And we've tested that, and those are true statements, but beyond that, I'm not the person to solve any problems with that. Let me just adjust the lighting here for one moment. So tonight, I want to speak about living in uncertainty. And that is probably not a surprising topic given the coronavirus pandemic that we're in the middle of. It's all we're talking about. And it's all we're talking about because it's what we're living. So there's a lot that can be said about this pandemic, and it is even important and interesting. But you didn't try to get more updates on disease statistics. What we don't always get from the media is how we can use our current situation in skillful ways. So as practitioners, we know that our happiness derives not from our circumstances, but from our relationship to our circumstances. Some people will say it's not about having what we like, but about liking what we have. So how do we cultivate a useful relationship with this present set of circumstances? That is tonight's topic. So first, I want to pause and acknowledge the tragedy of the coronavirus pandemic. When I say that we want to cultivate a relationship with coronavirus, I don't want to seem dismissive or flippant. Today's tally from Johns Hopkins, at it an hour ago, showed that worldwide almost 500,000 people are infected, and that today we passed the dubious marker of 20,000 deaths worldwide. Millions of people will suffer from illness. Millions will suffer from financial hardship, including loss of jobs, loss of homes, retirement savings. So far, the stock market has lost 1/3 of its value. Tens, if not hundreds of thousands will die. And for every death, there will be many, many others who suffer the loss of that loved one. We are embarking on a time of profound loss. We should do everything in our power to slow the spread of this disease. We all know the recommendations about personal hygiene and social distancing, and I don't need to repeat them. But even with our best efforts, we're in a time of unprecedented uncertainty. And that's the opportunity for practice that I want to speak about. And when I say practice, I don't just mean formal meditation practice. I mean living each moment of our lives in accordance with the Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path, that practice. So tonight I want to kind of touch on 3 points. The first is I want to talk seems to be important to us. Then I want to explore what light the Dharma can shed on the certainty. And finally, I want to look at how we use the Dharma to live as skillfully as possible during this time. So our minds crave certainty. Our minds are certainty. Our minds obsess over certainty. Often in these teachings, we'll hear about desire, and usually our thoughts go to, well, desire for material possessions, desire for sex, desire for recognition, those kinds of objects. But the desire we have for certainty is not always as evident to us. So as we seek to create this certainty, often unconsciously, we plan endlessly. We check the weather before we get dressed. We check the traffic before we leave home. We plan what we're going to have for supper, and what we're going to do this weekend, and what retreats we'll go on, where we'll go on vacation this year, what age we'll retire, and on and on. Our mental habit of planning is nowhere more evident than in meditation. We place our attention on the breath with the most honest of intentions, and we stay with it for a few moments, and then we notice that we're lost in planning mind. As we move through life, we are constantly monitoring how our experience compares to what we had planned. So the first piece of this is planning, and the second piece is monitoring. When we see things begin to deviate from our plans, when they go off track, we exert to bring them back into alignment. And when these deviations happen, they bring with it discomfort. And the greater the deviation from our plans, the greater the discomfort. When we are not able to bring things back to our planned outcome, we experience frustration and disappointment, as though something has gone terribly wrong. In fact, what went wrong was our expectation that our plans would come to fruition undisturbed. So we plan and we monitor, and then after the fact, we review what has happened. Often we obsess over what went wrong, how things might have turned out differently. If only I had thought to say this. If only I had gotten there a few minutes earlier. If only I had prepared more for this meeting. Dharma teacher Rodney Smith used to say, "It's always too late to have a happier past." So taken together, the planning and the monitoring and the reviewing consume a great deal of our mental state. No wonder it's so challenging to practice mindfulness of the present moment when all this activity is going on. Now, I want to clarify, I don't want you to misunderstand and think that I'm saying we should never plan, or we should never monitor, or we should never review what happened and learn from it. They're all useful activities when we utilize them correctly. Without the ability to plan and to monitor and to review, the world as we know it could not function. Your ability to participate in tonight's virtual Sangha meeting is due to the efforts of volunteers who utilized these very skills over the past days and weeks. But the problem arises when these mental activities become our default mode of being in the world. In that case, they displace our moment-to-moment mindfulness. When we use these tools correctly, we take them off the shelf, use them as they're needed, and then put them away and return to mindful awareness in each moment. Another problem is that when we abide in the delusion that we can somehow create, another problem is that we often abide in the delusion that we can somehow create and sustain certainty in our lives. In fact, certainty is just an illusion. And we see that so clearly right now. Theravadan Buddhist monk Thanissaro Bhikkhu has said this about certainty or reliability. So here he's referencing a term, anicca, which is from the Pali language, the time of the Buddha. He says the Pali term here, anicca, is something translated as impermanent, but that's not what it means. Its opposite, nicca, describes something that's done constantly and reliably. You can depend on it. But if something is anicca, it is unreliable. It wavers. If you try to base your happiness on it, you have to keep tensing up around it. Like trying to find some rest while sitting on a chair with wobbly, uneven legs. So that really leads into the second point that I want to make, which is how the Dharma can inform our relationship with certainty and uncertainty. So as we look at our desire for certainty, this particular object of desire, we can look at it from the point of view of the second and third noble truths. And just to review, the Four Noble Truths is kind of the one of, if not the most foundational teaching of the Buddha. And those truths are the truth of dukkha, a word that's usually translated as suffering or unsatisfactoriness. And the truth of dukkha is that it is a part of the human experience. It's not all of the human experience, but it's an integral part. The second truth is the cause of dukkha. That is clinging or attachment. The third truth is the cessation of dukkha. That is, to the extent we can reduce or eliminate clinging, we can reduce or eliminate dukkha. And the fourth is the step-by-step path that helps us get from here to there, to reduce or eliminate our clinging, and that's the Noble Eightfold Path. So out of those four truths, the second one, the truth of the cause of dukkha, and the third one, the truth of the cessation of dukkha, really are very relevant to our need for certainty. When we can see how strong our attachment to certainty is, we can understand why it brings so much dukkha. Attachment to anything brings dukkha. So here's what we know about this whole dynamic. We know that the mind has a strong tendency to try to create certainty and to avoid certainty. We also know that this effort will always fail to a greater or lesser extent. And we know that how we relate to our efforts to create certainty and the failure, how we relate to them, will determine our experience. To the extent we can not attach to the outcome, we will have less suffering, less dukkha, and to the extent we attach, we will have more. So that's a little bit about kind of a dharma perspective on this need we have for certainty. Now, the last thing I want to touch on are opportunities for us in this time. If you had asked a month ago if there was any way to slow down the frenetic pace of our lives, very few would have said that question. No political candidate could have delivered that. No sports or entertainment celebrity could have delivered that. Not even the largest and the most powerful business entity in the world could do that. But now we see that, in fact, it is possible for us to slow down. Shunryu Suzuki said, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the experts, there are few." So this speaks to our tendency to narrow down possibilities as we try to certainty. The more we know, the less we can see as a range of options, a range of possibilities. And now all of a sudden our lives have changed and things that we never thought were possible just might be possible. Many people's days are no longer occupied with work responsibilities. We're not spending times in restaurants or in shops or in theaters. Much of the economic activity in our nation has stopped. So here's one thing that has not changed, and that is the nature of the mind. Unconsciously, we have already begun the project to recreate as much certainty as we can under these circumstances. Just one example of that I see in my life. I am over 60, and I now know the rule that if you're over 60, you can go to the grocery store before they open, and you can get things that are hard to get otherwise. So that's a part of my little world now that I live with. And as we watch, we'll see our minds are hard at work, creating safety and certainty for us everywhere they can. But our opportunity here is to expand our view of what's possible. We couldn't see that we could do it before this disease spread, and we won't be able to see how to do it afterwards. But in this moment of uncertainty, this precious moment of uncertainty, we are freed from the tyranny of certainty. And we have access to a dynamic that's rarely available to us. Now, if we were all in a room together, I'd ask for a show of hands of how many of you saw the world according to Garp. I've always remembered the opening where Glenn Close is on the beach and she's tossing her infant son into the air. And all we see is a shot of the clouds in the sky, and then this infant rising and falling into and out of the frame in slow motion. And if you've seen the movie, you probably remember that opening. And with each pass, his face becomes more animated and more delighted at this experience of being tossed in the air. Over the past couple of weeks, I found myself repeatedly returning to this image of lightness, of freedom, as the certainty in my life has faded away. Now, mind you, there are also many moments of stress and risk. I'm not abiding in that lightness every moment. But the possibility of these moments are what I want to point to tonight. I invite you to see if there are opportunities in your life to open to the unknown, to embrace being the beginner, not the expert. The window will close soon, either when the pandemic is over, or more likely when we all create as much certainty as we are able within this new normal. So one favorable result of this pandemic is there's been a very marked reduction in air pollution. Imagine that. The big cities, when you look from outer space and have, cameras that'll show the pollution, the big cities, the pollution's fading away. Who knew? And I don't think up until now, anybody realistically considered that could be accomplished in such a short amount of time. But here we are. It's now clear that the slow march toward global warming is not immutable. Now, I'm not predicting that pollution will remain low when the pandemic abates, only that now we have evidence that change is at our fingertips, and we can be inspired and sustained by that knowledge. Another favorable outcome is that we are having to find ways to sustain our relationships electronically. Is that favorable? Well, maybe. Because we had no choice, we've been forced to migrate our interactions to electronic platforms. And that's resulted in a reduction in air travel and car travel. Now, of course, we'll be eager to be in one another's company again when it's safe, but we will have mastered some options that we might have otherwise been avoiding. I can speak for one. I've been avoiding them. And we'll also probably have a greater appreciation for our in-person contacts when they're safe again. Another favorable outcome is that people are slowing down and looking more closely at what is really important. Many people already live with a vague sense that there's a disconnect between the pace of their lives and the lives that they aspire to. But now it's in our faces. Because of this pandemic, some people will reevaluate their priorities, and they will decide to dedicate themselves to making changes that they need to make. There are many opportunities that come with this uncertainty, but we must seize them while they're available. I've offered a few examples, but it's really not my intention to provide a complete list. The benefit here is not having the list. The benefit is the process of identifying these opportunities that each of us go through. So just to review, we've looked at the nature of the mind and its attachment to certainty. We've looked a little bit at what the Dharma tells us about the way that dynamic works. And we've looked at a few possibilities as to how this pandemic can prove beneficial. So I'll just conclude by encouraging, inviting each of us to utilize this unique opportunity to its fullest, because again, soon it will be gone. So that is what I want to share tonight. As I said, if you want to chat in a question, and if you have a Google account and you are signed into it, then there should be a place on the side of your screen where you can chat. And if you don't have any questions, or if you don't have a Google account, or if you can't figure out how to do it, then we can sit in silence, which we know how to do. And so I'm just going to give this a few minutes and see if any questions show up. While I'm waiting, I will just put everybody's mind at ease that before we started, I took a Clorox wipe and I wiped off the camera and I wiped off the microphone. So nobody is going to be infected from watching this YouTube. So here's a question. How can we trust our fortitude to deal with whatever uncertainty throws us? So I think that's a good question. An oversimplified answer, the first thing that comes to my mind is we don't have any other choice. We have the fortitude and maybe we don't, but uncertainty is going to throw these things our way. So that's kind of a little bit of a cynical answer. A different answer is, this is my experience, when we slow down, when we look carefully, we have a vast reserve of wisdom and strength that we can draw on that we don't always have access to. And slowing down through meditation practice in particular, and through following this path in general, gives us access to that wisdom and that energy that sometimes we don't really think we do have access to. There are a couple thoughts. So here's a question. Can you give some thoughts on how to determine what's next for an individual? Wow. The answer might be discernment. And, you know, if we're looking at long-term questions, I haven't been able to work. Now I can see that my job isn't satisfying my needs. We've got time to think that through so we can reflect on it. We can allow wisdom to inform that over time. Sometimes we have to make quick decisions, short-term decisions, how to determine what's next for an individual. You know, we're worried about our neighbor next door. Are they okay? Should we knock on the door? If the door's open, should we go in there? Sometimes there are decisions we have to make in the moment. And I think the answer is I don't know that I can give any more direction on that than trusting you'll make the best decision you can in the moment. They will never be all perfect, but if we're not attached to the outcome, then we'll just have to accept the fact that we're doing the best we can. Okay. I think we will move on. I want to, before I do announcements, I want to, okay, so we've got a couple more minutes, and there is one more question that has appeared, and I want to take a moment and respond to that. Do you have any insight into how we manage our fear? It feels like we need to manage our fear, and maybe we do need to manage our fear. But I think the first thing I would point to is the notion managing our fear, which has kind of embedded in it the idea that somehow it's a task we've been assigned. And I think a different way to be in relationship with it is to open to it. Now, that's easy to say when you're not consumed with fear. I know that. But I think our aspiration is to open as we're able, as we can, to the fear, and to not try to manage it so much as to try to know what's true in each moment. And if we know what's true in each moment, this is a moment of fear, fear feels like this, then fear doesn't stay forever. It's like everything else. It's impermanent, it's unreliable, it comes and goes. And the more we can be with our fear, the more we'll begin to trust that it won't overwhelm us, it won't consume us. It won't all happen at once. But I think instead of managing the fear, I think kind of making friends, developing a relationship with the fear. That's the thought that comes to my mind. Okay. Before I talk about it, I just want to say one thing. This is new for us. I hope this has been satisfactory. It looks like we now have 55 people participating. That feels like a Wednesday night crowd. So I'm delighted that we're all together this week and hope we will be in the future on Wednesdays. The email you got earlier today providing the link for this YouTube live stream also had invited your feedback and had an email address, which is marketing@imccharlotte.org. And if you have any suggestions, observations about how this was for you and what might make it better, please share them with us. That's another practice of dana, or generosity, when you share your feedback with the Sangha. Okay, announcements. Next week, our guest leader is Joe Parisi. And Joe, many of you know Joe comes regularly, and he will be offering a written reflection that'll be posted on the website next week. Mark Nunberg was scheduled to be here on the 15th and 16th of May. That has been postponed. More information will be available when it's worked out. On the 13th of May, Larry DeWalt, who's one of our Dharma leaders in training, will be our guest leader. And unless something changes, that will be the same format we've used tonight. On May 24th, the annual Sangha picnic will take place at Freedom Park, unless something changes. Too soon to know the answer to that. It is possible that next Wednesday our format will be different. We'll be in touch with you, but we may well experiment with different methods of being together on Wednesday nights. We'll see how that goes. And there is a Beyond the Basics, a 4-session Beyond the Basics series that is scheduled for May 5th, May 19th, June 2nd, and June 16th. And that will take place either in person or electronically. We don't know which. The topic is the divine messengers, and the divine messengers are the truths of aging, illness, and death. Might be timely. If that is of interest to you, you can register. The directions for registering are on the website. Okay, so why don't we close with our loving kindness or metta meditation. Just find a comfortable posture. Closing your eyes. And let's begin, as we usually do, by naming. You can do it out loud. You can do it silently to yourself. Naming anyone that you'd like to have held in loving kindness as we practice tonight. And while we don't have the benefit of hearing the names that are being called out, our intentions are no less genuine and no less sincere. We begin by directing loving kindness toward ourselves. I'll offer phrases that you can repeat silently to yourself. May I be safe from inner and outer harm. May I be happy and content. May I be healthy in body and mind. May I live a life of well-being from suffering. Then turning our attention to another being, awful lot from right now. We'll include all the names that were recognized earlier. And in particular, the more than 1,000 people who have died worldwide since I checked the numbers this morning. Between this morning and this evening, more than 1,000 deaths. May you be safe from inner and outer harm. May you be happy and content. So here we're looking at the wide people affected by illness, by death. May you be healthy in body and mind. And may you live a life of well-being, free from suffering. And finally, broadening our loving kindness or metta practice out to all beings everywhere. May all beings be safe from inner and outer harm. May all beings be happy and content. May all beings be healthy in body and mind. And may all beings, without exception, live lives of well-being, free from suffering. So before we end, I just want to I want to make one other announcement, I suppose, and that is over the last 2 weeks, it has taken quite a lot of work for this Sangha to move from where we were to where we are. And it wouldn't be possible to recognize all the people that have made that happen, but Elizabeth and Thea have been particularly involved in making sure that we could offer this YouTube tonight. Thank you to them. Clyde took responsibility for setting up another communication system, Zoom, that can be used for other meetings. And Denise, our board chair, has been doing a yeoman's job with many, many responsibilities. So to those 4 people and to everyone, thank you for what you're doing for the Dharma. Okay, we'll see you next week.